Welcome, everybody. Wake up, Patriots. I'm Larry Swikart in for Ed Henry here. Good to have you with us. A lot of stuff going on. Here's the big four things I'm going to talk about. You know how Rush Limbaugh used to say that he had so much in the stack of stuff that he couldn't get through it in a single program. Well, we may be at that point today, but I'll do my best to get through this stuff. But the four big ones are this. We're going to talk about the Democrat National Convention and what's going on there. Viewership was down 22% from 2016 when Trump came in. It was a little higher than the Republican convention. I think because everybody knew what was going to happen there. My guess is that on opening night of the Democrat convention, a lot of people mistakenly, because they don't understand how these things work, but a lot of people tuned in to see Joe Biden say his farewell and leave and see what was going to happen. When they hear somebody is being kicked out, many people literally think that somebody's going to come out and escort him off stage or something. So I think that there was a little bit of that happening, and why viewership has now started to decline. The second big issue we're going to talk about really came out yesterday, and that was this jobs report, or better yet, this revision of the jobs report. They knocked it down by an astoundingly huge number. And I think this tells us a lot of things. So we'll take a look at that. The third really big story, kind of breaking, we're still waiting on an announcement either today or tomorrow, is it appears that RFK Jr., Bobby, is going to be dropping out of the race, and that he could endorse Trump. His vice presidential candidate said as much. So we'll be watching that and look at the ramifications of what happens if Bobby indeed drops out and endorses Trump. Just dropping out is probably going to help Trump some, but if he endorses Trump, that could help Trump more than a little. Not a huge amount, but more than a little. And then finally, I am asked in my talks and speeches and appearances two questions more than any other questions. One is, why is the press so biased? And you'll recall last week I gave you a kind of historical look at where the media, the newspapers, but later all media came from, that they came from the parties, that they were biased from the beginning. That was what they were created to be. They were created to get people elected. But the other question I'm asked, and what I want to address today in our last segment, is why are universities so biased? How did we get to where almost all the universities are totally left-wing? So those are the four big topics on the table for today. So I got to admit, I'm totally bored with the Democrat convention. I just can't stand to see these people get up and screech, and they're holier than thou, and it drives me crazy. So you have one radical after another getting up there and giving these speeches. Probably the most ridiculous of all was Michelle Obama getting up and lecturing the country about inequality. Now, this is a person who will go home to a Hamptons mansion valued at over $20 million. The Obamas in 2018, after criticizing America and destroying America for 8 years. I forgot it was 8 years, wasn't it? They signed a Netflix deal. Now, what's interesting about this is when I was researching this Netflix deal, almost always every report of a director or a producer or an actor or an actress signing a big movie deal, TV deal, will say, Hugh Jackman just signed to reprise Wolverine in the latest movie for $25 million. They will always give you the amount that they signed for. You know what's interesting in this Obama story? And I went back, I looked at probably 10 or 15 different stories. And it took a long time to find out what they were actually paid. It was very interesting that the outlets hid how much the Obamas were being paid. Well, I finally found it, and the estimate is they were paid $50 million for the Netflix production deal. And by production, if you're not around Hollywood, anybody can be a producer. Anybody. All it takes is money. You don't need to work. You don't need to have talent. You don't need to do anything except throw money at something and say, hey, I want to make a picture about a light bulb. Okay, you got money? Yeah, here. So to say they're producers, all that means is they spent the money that Netflix was giving them to make some of these shows, or that they kicked some of it back in. But it's very interesting to pay somebody $50 million as a producer who's never made a film in their life, never played a role in a movie, never directed, never produced, never wrote a script. Just pay them $50 million because of who they are. Now that came on top of, let me get this other number, $65 million that they were paid by publishers for their memoirs. And I have to admit, when I'm in airports, I kind of look around, see who's reading what, who's doing what. One of the biggest moments of my life was that I was in an airport in 2010 at a CNBC, I'm standing outside a CNBC booth, store, where they were selling candy and pop and magazines and everything else. And they had a ticker running across with the best-selling books, which, and of course, they had some of the bestsellers in there. And sure enough, there was Patriots History of the United States, right, coming up on the ticker. That was really cool. So they're paid $65 million for their memoirs. So the point is, for them to whine and complain about inequality in America, I mean, that's some chutzpah, as you might say. That takes a lot, because all they have to do to address inequality is give away some of that money. So anyway, we had them. We had showing Biden off, giving him the exit, and that was completely ignominious, embarrassing. If I didn't despise the guy so much, I'd say it was sad. But they kept shuntering him off, putting him off in his speech until it was after midnight Eastern time. They allowed 2 or 3 pro-abortion speakers to go on before he did, which was kind of a big middle finger to the Bidens. It was done deliberately, and it was done to say, Joe, you're not in charge anymore, not of nothing. You are meaningless. You're a useless piece of debris. And so we don't care what happens to you. That was really, I mean, contrast that with the reception given Bill Clinton, who, as one columnist pointed out, even now today does not warm the hearts of Democrats the way he used to. Remember, there was a time, well, I say remember, many of you are too young to remember this, but some of you would remember a time when Bill Clinton showing up at a Democrat event that was the bomb. I mean, that was everything. So he still can wow them a little bit, even at his age. But Biden certainly was given a kind of an embarrassing send-off. The real action and the real thing I want to discuss here about the Democrat convention is the protesters. Over 100,000. One number I saw was 106,000 protesters. Most of them these pro-Hamas murder pirate supporters who showed up. The anti-Israel, the anti-Semites showed up, maybe 100,000 of them. And the police were deployed. I haven't seen National Guard yet, but the police were deployed. And so far, it's been, as the media likes to say, mostly peaceful. You did have one incident where they managed to breach a wall for a second. You had some gas being thrown back and forth. But folks, I remember when protests were protests back in the Vietnam days. You go back to the Vietnam days, those marches, especially in Chicago in 1968 at the Democrat Convention. And that was protesting. You had Abby Hoffman, you had Jerry Rubin, you had Bobby Seale, you had the Chicago 7, you had 11,000 protesters, 1/10 of what they have in Chicago now. And they raised more hell than all of these 106,000 protesters have so far. When I heard there were going to be 106,000 protesters descending on Chicago, I had in my mind images of the movie World War Z. Have you seen that one? The zombie movie with Brad Pitt? And the zombies are attracted to sound. They're kind of alerted by sound. Otherwise, they just kind of walk around like this, like Democrats, right? And they're in Jerusalem, and all of these rabbis are going up to the Wailing Wall, and they're praying, they're making noises, and all of a sudden the zombies are alerted. They're going, shh, don't do that, don't do that. And the zombies start coming up to try to come over the wall. And there's millions of them. They're coming over the wall, standing on the backs of each other, and the soldiers are trying to shoot them down. And as they kill 100 and 300 more will appear. And they literally are crawling up like ants over this wall. Well, that's what I expected to see here in Chicago. I'm going, come on, you guys. Haven't you seen World War Z? Get with it. Let's see some real protest here. Now, I guess they did release some maggots in one of the restaurants at the hotels where the Democrat delegates were staying. But, you know, that was it. I mean, that big deal. So I think so far you can say of these protests, they have been utter, total, and complete failures, that they have not gotten to the delegates. They haven't gotten near the convention floor. They haven't in the slightest way affected policy or affected any of the speeches. And it's, to me, it's sad. I mean, I want these guys to be more effective. I want them to do something. As for the speeches themselves, we've heard nothing but abortion, abortion, abortion. And every once in a while, Trump, 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 Trump. It's interesting that in the Democrat platform, they mention abortion 13 times. You know how often they mention God? Try 0. I mean, that's pretty shocking. I'm sure you've also heard, I think we covered this last week, but you've heard about their abortion van that they have outside to give free vasectomies and free abortions to people attending the convention. Like, you're going to a convention, go, gee, I think maybe I'll get my nails done and get an abortion. Who thinks like that? I call it the Moloch Mobile, because that's exactly what this party has become now, is the party of Moloch, the party of Baal, the Baal worshipers. So it's very symbolic that one of the main images you will have of the Democrat convention is going to be this abortion van parked outside. Now, I've got a big section coming up here on jobs. So we're going to take a minute to look at our sponsor here before I get into it, because I don't want to break up this next big section. So, we've had some troubling times. We're going to get into the economy here next. We're going to get into this jobs report that's just really fraudulent. And I've got a story for you later on silver and how they are using silver in batteries, and the price of silver is expected to soar. So anyway, with all of this, you might want to consider protecting yourself with some hedge, like gold or silver. And so we here at Wake Up Patriots have partnered with Colonial Metals Group to give you a self-directed IRA This is very important because you can take your money out when you want to. A lot of the metals dealers hold your gold and silver for you, and you can't get it. You have to jump through hoops to get your money out. Not with Colonial Metals Group. They also have a Wake Up Patriots special that will give you a free safe and $10,000 in free silver when you start your account. So you might want to consider the guys at Colonial Metals Group, 800-805-4034. That's 800-805-4034. Okay, so I wanted to get to this story about the economy. And this came out yesterday, and it's a massive jobs revision downward. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, gives us our official monthly jobs numbers. Now, understand there's a couple of numbers here. I don't want to get too technical, but one thing is there's a survey that says, are you currently employed? That's basically where it ends. And so if you're not, they say, okay, you're unemployed. There's another survey called the household survey that says how many people in your household are there and how many of them are employed. And what's interesting is those two numbers almost never line up. And one of the things you find about the difference in these two numbers is a very, very large group of people who have dropped out, who have quit looking for jobs. And I had a story 2 days ago in my today's news that in China, you're seeing a big number of these people. We have the term quiet quitting, where you might show up for work, but just not work, or show up late or whatnot, don't do any work while you're on the job. Well, they have a phrase over there. I think it's called lying low. I'm not sure. Lying flat. That's what it is. And in China, this is becoming a real problem because the Chinese Utes, don't want to work. And they are not being motivated or moved by any kind of traditional incentives. And this is a problem throughout Asia. Japan's had a problem with this, where you have Utes who won't even leave their house, their apartment, wherever they live, for years at a time. Young people. So you're going to see differences between the Bureau of Labor Statistics employment survey and the household survey. And what you always want to look for is a number of people who are out of the workforce, not just unemployed. How many are out of the workforce? That means that they lost their job, but they're still looking. They're out there looking for another job. But if they're out of the workforce, it means they're not in the work. They're not even looking. And what happens with the government statistics is they very frequently ignore that second group. They don't even tell you how many people have quit looking altogether, which is a sign of desperation, despair, right? Pessimism. So here comes the BLS. They revised down the number since March. That's March, April, May, June, July, less than 6 months. They revised the total number down by 818,000, almost 1 million jobs. They said, well, we were a little off. We were off by 818,000. There were 818,000 fewer jobs created than what the Bureau of Labor Statistics said. 818,000. Now, that's not a decimal point, folks. You're not there on your phone calculator going, okay. Oh, I was a little off by 818,000. I mean, these are errors of an incredible order of magnitude. And so, how about this one? 10 out of the last 12 reports they have had to revise downward. It's like you see these stories about job expectations or economic growth or whatnot, and you'll almost always see the phrase unexpected, or an unexpected number, or higher than economists expected, or lower than economists expected. Why are you still using these guys? I mean, if you went to a doctor and every single time the doctor says, well, your blood pressure is higher than we expected with this medication, every time, you'd be looking for a different doctor. I mean, if you had a contractor working for you and he's measuring the floor, and every time he mismeasured it, oh, we're going to have to buy more materials. I underestimated. Or we bought too many materials. I overestimated. That's what's happening with the Bureau of Labor Statistics every single month. They're getting it wrong every single month. And it's always, for them, it's always they are overestimating the number of jobs every single time. Now, why? Well, folks, you could say they're the most incompetent bureau in government, but that'd be saying a lot. I mean, you'd have a lot of real competition there. Department of Energy, Biden's green program that was supposed to create hundreds and hundreds of charging stations for millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it created, what, 8? But when they're all in the same direction, you have to start using the F word, as in fraud. You've got to start saying, these people aren't just wrong. They are cooking the books deliberately to try to make the administration look better. That's the only outcome, only conclusion you can come to when you're looking at an error of almost 1 million misestimated jobs over a 5.5 month period. That's just incredible. Now, the other thing is, we're constantly hearing about Biden's great economy. Well, what has his great economy done? Do you know what his economic growth has been? At best, the best number he's ever gotten, I think, is 2.3%. That's not normal. Usually his economy's under 2%, 1 point something percent. Well, Reagan came in the midst of a roaring recession and had us up to 4% GDP growth in a period of 2 years. Okay. So, yes, you did have COVID, but prior to COVID, Trump had us growing at way over 2%. I think he was close to 3 something percent. He was on his way to Reagan numbers, and the employment was all going the right direction. Minorities were being employed at very high rates, highest ever for blacks. And Biden. I have my nicknames for all these people. If you go to my Twitter feed, usually, I have to digress. I was bumped off Twitter last week. I don't think it was malicious directly toward me by Twitter. It appears a number of so-called influencers, I hate that word, were hacked. And it was a official Twitter-looking hack, but it wasn't Twitter, apparently. So they restored a few people already. I'm waiting to get restored. They've contacted me. But usually when my Twitter feed is up, at Larry Swikart, that's my usual name up there, I have a list of nicknames on my profile page. And so you can go there and see. And my nickname for Joe Biden is the Rutabaga, for obvious reasons. But Biden has never had economic growth that even remotely came close to either Trump or Reagan. And Trump had phenomenal economic growth till we got to the China virus. So, as in all of these numbers, all of these job numbers, you're going to have to assume that they are being manipulated, that you've got to call all of them into question because they've been wrong, as I said, 10 out of 12 months, and they're always wrong in the same direction. It's sort of like the polls. Have you ever noticed, with the exception of Rasmussen, almost all the polls are wrong in the same direction in favor of Democrats? And I've been honest with you guys. I thought all season, since we've been looking at polling, that Rasmussen has been too high for Donald Trump. He's had Trump up 10. I think in Pennsylvania, he had him up 10. He's had him up 4 to 6 to even, I think, 8 nationally. That's too high. And President Trump doesn't need to be that high to win. If he's at 1, he wins the election +1, and not just the Electoral College, but the popular vote. Trump could tie the popular vote and win the election in the Electoral College. He could, like he did with Hillary, slightly lose the popular vote and win the election. But the polls, with the exception of Rasmussen, are always biased, it seems, in the favor of the Democrats. And so the same thing's happening now with all of these government numbers. It's fraud. And I think, as much as anything else that needs to be investigated, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and all of the people put together these reports and the Commerce Department need an audit. We've had a lot of talk, for example, especially after Bobby dropped the bomb that he may be leaving the race and endorsing Trump, which I'll get to next. But we've had a lot of talk about who would be in a Trump administration. And I could find any number of great places for Vivek Ramaswamy. I'd like to see him in charge of the FBI or the CIA. I know he wouldn't get confirmed because he's not a lawyer. But I think he could get confirmed at Commerce. And if Vivek Ramaswamy is our Commerce Secretary, the first thing he should do would be to launch an audit of all of these number agencies and find out where the fraud is and fire people who were engaged in this kind of fraud, not just recently, but for the last 3 years. That's a good place to start on all this, but you have to hold these people accountable, or they're going to keep doing it. Okay, so in connection with the economy, I mentioned this earlier. I had this story out of, where is this source? Kitco News, Kitko News, Kitco News. And the story is that there is a new solid state battery being produced, and it uses silver. It uses a lot of silver. Now, silver and gold, as you know, are not just money. They are commodities that are used in production of all sorts of things. Remember, they used to use gold in the visors for the astronauts. But this use of silver, according to this story, says that silver is set to explode, to skyrocket, because all of a sudden it's going to become common in these EV batteries. Now, whether or not you think EVs are the wave of the future, I think we can agree that for the next couple of years, at least, if nothing else, through government pressure and government subsidies, EVs are going to be with us for a couple of years, which means EV batteries are going to be with us for a few years anyway. Silver is going to play a main part of that. And so silver prices are going to go up. It would probably be a good time to get in on silver before a price hike. You're going to need silver to diversify your portfolio anyway. It's always good to have, better actually than gold, to have in times of crisis, because you can spend dimes, you can spend quarters, you can spend silver dollars. It's hard to go in with a gold dollar that may be worth $700 or $800 or $1,200 or $2,000 and say, I need change. That's kind of hard. By the way, one time, I got to tell you guys, one time when I was building my drum set, I was building it one piece at a time. I'd save up my money and buy a drum and got a snare drum. And I'd go buy a tom-tom. I'd go buy a cymbal. Well, ordered and bought a tom-tom, and I paid for it with pennies. That guy was not happy. I think it was almost $100 in pennies. Boy, was he not happy. But anyway, Colonial Metals can help set you up with silver before it goes crazy, right? So check into Colonial Metals. They have a self-directed IRA where you can get your money out anytime you need if there's an emergency. They also have a special program they set up for the Wake Up Patriots people, where they will give you a free safe and $10,000 in free silver to start your account with the right program. So check it out. You can never be too diversified, have too much gold, or have too much silver. So we now come to the story about Bobby Kennedy. And his running mate, Nicole Shanahan, was doing a podcast in which she said that they may have to stop their campaign, they end the campaign, and endorse Donald Trump. Now, Bobby has not specifically said that yet, but he and Trump have talked on 2 occasions, at least 2 that we know of, one at the RNC, and then there was another communication. And there was an interesting poll done by Robert Barnes's 1776 project. I can't remember the exact name of his project. It involves 1776. It's not the 1776 that I was a part of briefly from Trump. But anyway, this group commissioned a poll on freedoms: food freedom, financial freedom, speech freedom, and medical freedom. And they wanted to see how big the support was out there. And it was a very well done poll because they always had alternatives there. Do you believe in this if this will happen? If you don't have a condition, it's too easy for people to say, oh, yeah, I want to give people $10,000 a month. Well, do you want to give people $10,000 a month if your taxes go up? Oh, well, no. So anyway, they did this poll on these freedoms, and what did they find? They found an exceptional number of people favored food freedom, being able to go to individual farmers, whether it's the Amish in Pennsylvania or fairs or whatnot in other states, and buy your food directly from farmers without having to go through regulators. And there was also a very, very strong support. We're talking over 50% in each case for crypto and for financial freedom. That people want to be able to own gold, own silver, whatever it is, because they don't trust government money. Well, why am I mentioning this with Bobby? Because medical freedom is his thing. Freedom from the vax, freedom from big pharma. And Trump had to walk a narrow line there because he obviously supported the vax, but he did not support mandating it, which is his big saving grace on the vax. There's a lot of people, you know them, I know them, will not vote for Donald Trump because he sponsored the vax. And we know what kind of things the vax has done. But he didn't mandate it. And he has increasingly begun to play up the fact that he did not mandate it, that he favored opening up the country as soon as possible, that he advocated for hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. He did all those things. So in that respect, he and Bobby have very common ground. And so one thing that happened when Bobby announced he wanted to run for the Democrat nomination, the Democrats went into full protective mode to keep him out. They started lawsuits in all sorts of states to keep him off the ballot. And Bobby had to spend a lot of his campaign funds fighting these lawsuits just to get on the ballot. The other thing they did, which you know about, is that Biden denied Bobby Secret Service protection. And as you can imagine, the guy's probably a little bit concerned with assassins. He had an uncle and a father die from assassins. He saw Trump shot. So he had to spend a lot of his campaign money on security. So security and getting on ballots took up most of his campaign money. He couldn't afford big ad campaigns or whatnot. So he apparently is going to drop out. I think it would be pretty funny if he issued his statement today rather than tomorrow and sucked all the air out of Kamala Harris's speech tonight. I don't really like using sucked in the same sentence with Kamala Harris. But anyway, and just took all the publicity away from her. But word is that he's going to make an announcement tomorrow and that he is, in fact, going to endorse President Trump. So is there a quid pro quo? Has Trump already said something to him? Well, Trump said publicly that he would like to find a place for Bobby in his administration. And there's a couple of places that I could see fitting him very well. One would be CIA director. I would love to see Bobby Kennedy as CIA director and watch him tear that thing down to the stubs, just completely eviscerate that useless agency. And if we need spy agency, start again, but start under very, very tight controls. The other kinds of jobs I could see him in, I don't want him in Health and Human Services. I know he's been mentioned for that. And the reason is abortion. He's not on the same side as Trump when it comes to issues of abortion. And I'm afraid that as HHS director, he would be caught in a lot of tension over that. But you could put him in charge of the Food and Drug Administration or the CDC, whoever's running the CDC. There's a number of places where you could put Bobby Kennedy and turn him loose and say, go get him. I want you to go after Big Pharma. I want you to go after Dr. Fallacy, Dr. Fauci. Go get him and empower him to do some serious damage to the deep state. And believe me, these people would freak out if you put Bobby in charge of the FDA. I also had suggested agriculture because of the food freedom, but that unfortunately puts him in the line of secession. And I'm not sure you want to do that. But there's so many places that you can use Bobby. Now, what's the impact of Bobby Kennedy pulling out of the race politically? Well, Barris, more than anybody, has seen Bobby Kennedy hurts Trump in some Pennsylvania counties. They're Democrat counties that would otherwise probably vote for Trump. But if Bobby's in there, they would be more likely to vote for him. So by taking Bobby out of the election, I think that pretty much Pennsylvania swings very heavily now to President Trump. There are some other places where Bobby could probably help Trump. I've noticed that in the head-to-head, Trump does about 1 point better against Harris than he does if Bobby and third-party candidates are involved. Now, the big question, how many votes would Bobby bring from his supporters to Trump with an endorsement? And I think it would be some. I don't know how many, but the very fact that you are now aligning food freedom and medical freedom with Trump would go a long way toward bringing many RFK Jr. voters over to Trump. So we'll see how that plays out. In other words, find a place for Bobby in the administration where he can do serious damage to the deep state, but where his climate change and his abortion ideas kind of don't get in the way of anything else. So good for Trump. Robert Barnes in his podcast the other night mentioned that this came about largely because Trump was not closed off, and Barnes doesn't particularly like Trump's advisors, Susie Wiles or Chris LaCivita. I think Wiles has done a heck of a job so far. She's got Trump this far and ahead. So there's that. But anyway, they apparently didn't like the Bobby connection. They wanted to push Trump more toward the traditional donor class and so forth. In this case, he is really smart in trying to bring Bobby into the tent and get his supporters involved, because these are people who will vote on medical and food and financial security issues, financial freedom issues. So all in all, this greatly helps Trump. Now, I found it interesting. We've not had a lot of national polls since the convention began. I think going back to last week, the last set of polls we had last week, 3 of the 4 had Trump up. One of them was Rasmussen, had Trump up 4, again, too high, but the others were all 1 to 2 points, and one had him down a point. The Economist has now moved in its predicted odds Trump back ahead of Harris by several points. As I recall, it was about 7 points in the predicted odds. So it's interesting that we haven't had a lot of national polling since Harris had that good week, that good bump. We have had some very interesting comments. David Axelrod said that, quote, and this was 2 days ago, if the election were today, Trump would win. A leader of Harris's super PAC said, well, the poll numbers are a little too optimistic. In other words, she knew the internals are showing that she's down. And Barris thinks, and I think, that we're going to get about 1 to 2 more weeks of halo effect of good Harris bounce. She apparently hasn't gotten a single point bounce so far out of the convention, which is highly irregular and unusual. But I think that you can expect some polls, many polls, to still have her up 1 for the next 2 weeks, and then the slide's going to start. And they're too late now. That she's accepted the nomination as of tonight. They're stuck with her and Tim Walz, Tampon Timmy, who seems to be just a scandal machine. He just seems to have a new scandal every day. So they're not flipping anybody out. Bill Clinton isn't coming back. Hillary Clinton isn't coming back. Michelle Obama's not coming in. Barack Obama's not coming in. They're stuck with Harris. So we'll see where that goes. Well, folks, make sure you check up with Colonial Metals Group. They can help you in this time of financial insecurity and weakness and instability. Gold and silver are always sources of economic stability in every society throughout history. They just are. By the way, that's one of the reasons why the edges of silver coins, copper, not nickels, but silver coins, are serrated. They have edges because governments, emperors, kings, if they needed money, they used to have the treasury shave the edge off of their coins, and you do enough shaving, you got a new coin, you got an extra coin, right? It's a form of inflation through metals. Well, we don't do that at Colonial Metals. You can stabilize your financial security by getting yourself a self-directed IRA account with Colonial Metals. Did I get that phrase right? Let me look at that. Self-directed IRA. And that means you can take your money out whenever you want it. Also, remember, they have an offer where you can get a free safe and $10,000 of free silver. So check out Colonial Metals at 800-805-4034. That's 800-805-4034. Now, as you know, I'm a historian. I have a full curriculum in U.S. history and world history at my Wild World of History website. We have tons of free stuff up there too, folks. You want to get your kids in there and just poke around in the blogs. I've got probably 20 or 30 free history vignettes about everything from the Winged Hussars, the charge of the Winged Hussars against the Muslims, to was Prohibition popular, to Hitler, to Napoleon, to the Federal Reserve. There's all sorts of interesting stuff there free. But I also have a VIP subscription where I do lessons, video history lessons. And these are anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes each. And there's at least 50 of them, maybe 60 now up. I'm almost finished with my latest one on Churchill. I call it Integrity. And the first character I looked at was Winston Churchill. And I've got 2 more episodes to record there. And that series is done. I finished the series on Reagan, the American president, has 21 videos, but there's lots of stuff up there in the VIP or in the free side. So check it out. But as a historian, probably one of the 2 most commonly asked questions I get is, why are universities so liberal? So let me see if I can explain what happened. Prior to the 1950s, universities pretty much taught the 3 R's at a much higher level, reading, writing, arithmetic. They just did a better job of it. They taught subject matter. They didn't get into a whole lot of political exposition. Now, you had exceptions, and you had people, particularly in philosophy departments, occasionally in sociology departments, which shouldn't even be a department. But other than that, most of the disciplines, well, they were disciplined. They taught real stuff. In the 1950s, with so-called McCarthyism, which wasn't as bad as everybody makes it sound, but among other things, there was a push to root communists out of our universities. Our universities started to have a lot of communist instructors in their plants from the KGB and from the Soviet Union in our university systems. So at that time, university presidents and boards of regents were cooperative, helpful, patriotic. And so they fired a lot of these communist professors. Now, if they were not preaching their communist ideology, which is very hard for them, but if they weren't preaching their communist ideology, that was wrong. They should not have been fired just because they're a communist any more than you should fire somebody just because he's a Jehovah's Witness or a Hindu or a flat earther. As long as they're teaching the subject, they should be allowed to stay. So a lot of people did get fired unfairly. A lot of people got fired fairly and should have been kicked out. So by the end of the 1950s, there was a backlash against McCarthy and McCarthyism. And this backlash started to say, we need to let these people in and show that we're tolerant, show that we can tolerate widely divergent ideas within our departments. And this mostly came in the humanities, history, English, sociology, but also political science, kind of the softer side, as they say, the non-science, the non-technology. And so we professors began bringing in known communists as instructors because it was viewed as too intolerant to keep them out. Now, let me just explain briefly how people get to be a professor. For the most part, starting around 1960, you could no longer become a university professor with just a master's degree. You needed a PhD. A PhD dissertation is a study that involves original research on your part. What does that mean? It means you're going to look at something nobody else has ever looked at before and come to some conclusions about it and contribute to the body of knowledge because you found something nobody else has ever seen before. Okay, That's what a dissertation is supposed to do. So starting in the early 60s, you needed to have a dissertation in order to become a college professor. So let's say you have your dissertation. How do you become a professor? Well, the universities publish these job searches, and they say University of Akron in Ohio is seeking a historian of the Gilded Age. Now, I need to stop here. Typically in history, up to this point, you had different periods that were specialized in by professors. A professor would specialize in the Age of Exploration or the Civil War or the Progressive Era. That doesn't happen at all anymore. It's changed so radically. But you would post a job listing, say, we need a professor in the Gilded Age, or an English department would say, searching for a professor who can teach modern literature from 1920 to the present. So job applicants would see that. They would write letters to say, I want your job. They would produce their resumes of what they've done, where they've studied, most important, whom they've studied with. That's crucial. The who is as important as any what you've ever done. And you would send those to search committees. A search committee is a group of professors within the department, usually at least 3, sometimes 5, and you would go over all these applications. Now, how many applications do you get? Well, in the 70s, when I was coming up, getting my master's, and in the 80s when I had my PhD and I was looking for a job, it was typical for job searches in history or English or sociology to get well over 100 applications. That's how desperate people were for jobs. And so your search committee is going to look at these 100 applications. Next, they would narrow them down. And usually they narrow them down by how close does this person fit what we're looking for? Is this person really a Shakespeare specialist, or are they a specialist in medieval literature who happened to write one paper on Shakespeare? And so you winnow that down to about 10 to 20 finalists or semifinalists. You then will have your search committee go to the major meetings, the Modern Language Association, the American Sociological Association, American Political Science Association, or American History Association annual meetings. Usually these were held over Christmas. Everybody's off, and you got to go usually to a then nice big city like New York or San Francisco. Remember, this is late 70s, early 80s. These cities still had not been destroyed then. And it was a vacation, a paid vacation by your university. You could take your husband or your wife, and you just make it into it and go see a show or whatnot. So when you're at these conventions, you would meet with these 10 or 20 semifinalists and interview them in person. And I just have to say this as an aside. I was a chairman over my course of time at the University of Dayton, 31 years. I was a chairman on at least 3, maybe 4 of these committees. I served on many more, but I ran 3 or 4 of these. And we would always get Ivy League applicants, people from Harvard or Yale or Penn, and we get all excited. Oh, look at this. This person from Harvard and this person from Yale are interested in the University of Dayton. Wow, how cool is that? You want to know something? They were terrible. They were always some of our worst applicants in the interviews. I don't think, maybe one time we invited one of them to a campus visit, but almost never did they even get out of the interviews because they were so narrowly focused on their little field of study that they couldn't explain why it was important. You know, I have a guy doing baseball, history of baseball statistics or history of second base or some nonsense like that. And I'd say, well, okay, how does this relate to broader history? When you go into the classroom, in what way are you going to incorporate your studies of baseball into teaching them about American history or about Western Civ or whatever it is? Couldn't answer. So after a while, we all came to realize that when you get an applicant from the Ivy League, they're going to be your worst applicants. I always found that interesting. So anyway, you interview all of these people, these 10 to 20 people, and you winnow it down one last time to finalists, usually 3, and you get invited to the campus itself. And while on campus, you would usually the applicant would do one or two things, or both. They would make a presentation to the faculty, and of course, a dean or provost, on their research and tell you why their research was the bee's knees, why it was really breakthrough stuff, why you needed to hire them because their research. But the other thing we always did, because we were a teaching university, we didn't even have a graduate program in history. We would have the applicants teach a class in Western Civ or in U.S. history. And we would bribe a lot of our students with something to come in and sit through these lectures. And most of the students, especially if they were in the Phi Alpha Theta Honorary Society, they were pretty good about doing that. And they would fill out evaluations, and we would review those evaluations as well as our own evaluation of the teachers, and then we'd make a job offer. Well, in the early 60s, due to the backlash against McCarthyism, the search committees began to let in more and more and more communists, saying, well, they're good scholars and they're good teachers. Well, yeah, they're good teachers. They're propagandists. That's what they were. But here's how they got so liberal. Here's how universities got so liberal. Once the communists and the far left got inside the departments, they no longer looked, when they were on the search committees, when they were the chairman of the search committees, they no longer looked for who was the best candidate. They looked for a fellow traveler. Where can I find another leftist? And they started ignoring scholarship altogether. Now, once you got a critical mass of enough of these people, a normal department might be 10 to 20 people. Once you had 3 or 4 of them, and they were zealots, they really cared about the cause, you could control a department because the rest of the faculty wanted to be left alone to do their work. Some of them also were just lazy and wanted to be left alone, period. But you get what I'm saying. A handful of zealots could control a department with a majority of non-communists who just didn't care all that much and didn't see the danger. So slowly, by the 1970s, many departments were already, I'm not just history, political science, sociology, English, philosophy, were all being controlled by these cliques of Marxists. Now, once they got into the position of hiring other people, and they were a majority of the search committee, nobody else had a chance. And I will never forget that we had really good candidates coming up, but they had the wrong dissertation topic. It would be about a general or a male politician that nobody knew about, or a new look at George Washington. But beginning in the early 90s, thanks to these cliques that had now gotten in control, now you got the final phase, and that was they began to control the scholarship itself. And so if you didn't have a dissertation in race, class, or gender, forget the topic, whatever the topic was, you had to look at it through the lens of race, class, gender, you were not going to get hired. And slowly universities began to get rid of Shakespeare classes. They began to get rid of American Civil War classes, Revolution Constitution, and things like this were replaced with gender roles in teaching literature, or literally, we have this, cross-dressing Indians in the Caribbean. So by that time, now you could not even find people who were working on what we would call traditional subject lines. whether it was Shakespeare, or whether it was good government, or whether it was the colonial era. That's how the left came to take over the universities. And that's why I think it's almost hopeless now that you're never going to fix the universities. You're just going to have to remove them. Well, people, it's been fun as always. I hope you enjoyed this little trip down University Lane. I hope that you'll be back with me next week for Wake Up Patriots. And until then, see you later. Stay a wild.